That leads to abiding victories because God's view begins to matter to the child. Now, the child really doesn't even know this is going on, but he's parroting and he's enthusiastic and he wants it. He doesn't know that he's achieving a victory, and especially a victory in the trial, okay, because he wants God's view. Okay, that's creating an abiding intimacy. The child, therefore, of course, is talking to God more. Prayer is essentially talking to God. It's not only about, asking for things. It's just being in conversation with God. Look at how David does it in the Psalms. All right? So the kid starts getting intimate with God. He doesn't know that's what's happening, but that is what's happening. He starts talking to God all the time. So that creates an abiding intimacy that begins to color in and grow. That creates, therefore, a starting of abiding compatibility as he learns the Word and he starts to practice it, he starts to think it. It's a child's level, but hey, baby, it's going on. And therefore, the first bit of the foundation of the four-sided divine happiness is also occurring. So I colored in just the H's. There is a certain heftiness that the first dots of that are beginning. There is a certain heartiness of happiness, and the first dots of that are beginning. Happiness is always thought-based. It's not emotion. Emotion comes along for the ride. There is a certain amount of the foundation, the first dots of the foundation of the Lord's own happiness are being laid now in childhood. And the first parts of the husband intimacy are being laid now in spiritual childhood. So spiritual childhood ends up being a sort of fleshy kind of spirituality, even when you're filled with the Spirit. Children are very body-oriented. When a child, one gets do's in order to teach no's. Hence a flesh color highlights this stage as I've highlighted it in part. I mean, you've got the whole chart there, but the spiritual child is only operating at the colored-in portions. And then below that, I've described what the colored-in portions mean. Hence, a flesh color highlights the stage. Portions of the title text are highlighted or bolded to signify the childhood portion of maturation. Note that the color and the highlight changes in the next 3 pages. Well, the next three sets of videos compared to this one, so that you can see, as this series is going to progress, you're going to see more and more of each of these pages colored in, and the descriptions of the activity will change. Underlined text in the page, in the chart here, changes as most of maturation progresses, or conversely, most speeds regress if sustained too long. In other words, notice that when it's consuming Bible in the third set of boxes, rarely or sporadically are underlined. If rarely or sporadic attendance of Bible class, rare and sporadic use of 1 John 1:9 continues too long, then the spiritual child will retard and stay a child when he should have become an adult. In other words, there is a certain period of time that spiritual childhood can go on and be normal. If you don't grow out of spiritual childhood, you become a spiritual retard. And the problem with that is that whatever spiritual maturation age you are when you die, that's what you're going to be forever. Your understanding gets capped. It's like having a capital base that's a small amount of capital. And yeah, you'll still grow forever, but you're growing from a smaller base. You're growing from a greater immaturity. And you'll be happy, but you'll be happy as a child would be happy. Okay? So the real trick of this, the hard part of the spiritual life, is that you have to grow out of these phases in time. And you can always, let's say that you've been a spiritual child for 20 years, and you should have only been one for 10 years, so now you're retarded. Okay, maybe you wake up to that fact before you die, and then you say, okay, I got to get serious about Bible. Well, then you're going to start to grow a lot faster. Okay, that happened to me. So I mean, I know how it works. I got beat up about 8 years ago, and it was my fault. And I realized that I had retarded in spiritual adulthood, and as a result of that, God zoomed me out of it, and it hurt. It still does. It'll never stop hurting. Okay, there's a punishment that goes with it, but it's worth it. So you can get out of being retarded, but you have to recognize it, and whatever stage you die in, that's going to be your capital base in eternity, and that's why you want to die in the final box, the olive box of spiritual maturity. You want to get there. It's a race. It's a treble. That's used in Hebrews 12:2. And it's also used, dramos is the synonym for treble, which is used in 2 Timothy 4:7. It's a race. It's a long-term race. Okay, so then that's the point about this underlined text here in this chart. It's rarely or sporadically, low or emotional. You got to grow out of those things that are underlined. You got to grow out of basic. You got to grow out of little. You got to grow out of little coordination. So look at the underlined things here in this spiritual childhood chart to know what the hickeys are to grow out of. Okay. Then the last thing to say about spiritual childhood is that all items listed in the fourth row of boxes in the abiding, that's Greek verb meno in the Bible, all items that are listed in the abiding categories most propel growth in that category, but they might only be present occasionally for the spiritual child. Okay? And that's the goal of the spiritual life, this fourth row is really what completes you. All right, and results in your moving from the left-hand side of the page to the right-hand side of the page. It's the aggregate result of all of the interaction of the 5 top verbs, of this, the use of the 10 problem-solving devices in the second row of boxes, of the spiritual maturation benchmarks, which are behavioral benchmarks, where you can look at your behavior and tell where you are in the spiritual life. They all lead to a building. My pastor likes to call that the edification complex of the soul. And that's what Paul's talking about when he talks about height, width, depth, length, is the fourth row of boxes. Both him and John talk about it. John's version of that is in 1 John 4:12 through 16. Paul's version is in Ephesians 3:15 through 19. And also in 1 Corinthians 3. So the goal is to turn you into a 7-faceted house of his thinking with the abiding functions, desires, development, plunder, victories, intimacy, and compatibility fully completed. It's a fully completed house, which results in a fully completed 4-sided divine happiness. So their ultimate goal is to have that all filled out. And as you can see, here in spiritual childhood, it's only just begun.
Softer. How does that go? I listen to the wind. I listen to it sing. It tells me. It tells me. What does it tell me?